Okay, here we go with worksheet 4.3. There are several different kinds of questions on here. The first group of questions just is trying to get you to figure out what quadrant something is in. So each of these inequalities gives you, kind of narrows it down to 2 quadrants. So when you see the sign is greater than 0, that should tell you, okay, that's the y value, sign is the y value, so it's got to be in the first or the second. But now this part tells me the cosine is negative. Cosine is negative when x is negative, because that's 1 over, or that's the x value, and so I look, that's in the second or third, so the one that makes both of them true is the second quadrant. Okay? It gets a little bit tougher when you start talking about tangents and things other than sine and cosine. So when it says the tangent is less than 0, tangent is the sine over the cosine, so it's y over x. For that fraction to be negative, less than 0, one of those two things has to be negative. So I could have a negative y and a positive x. That would put me down here. I could have a negative x and a positive y. That would put me in the second. So tangent is less than 0 in those two quadrants. Secant is 1 over the x value. So in order for that fraction to be negative, x has to be negative, which would be in the second or the third. So the one that makes both of those true is second quadrant. Okay, and similar to those would be one like this where it says cosecant, which is 1 over y. So the y is greater than 0 in the first or second. This says the tangent has to be less than 0, we already talked about, which is either the second or the fourth, because one of your x or y's have to be negative, the other one positive. So to make both of those true, again, we're in the second. And then the fourth one, the cotangent is negative, so that's x over y. So again, just like tangent, for that to be negative, one of the values has to be positive and one has to be negative. For the cosecant to be less than 0, cosecant's 1 over y. That means the y value has to be negative, so it's down here. So the one that makes both of those true is the fourth. All right, so just making sure that you know what those things mean, and if a fraction is negative, how you're going to get a negative value from that. Okay, that's those kinds of questions. The next kinds of questions just deals with drawing your picture, figuring out kind of what your reference angle is so you can get your ordered pair, and then finding the value, whichever it happens to be. Now, the thing about these is they're bigger than 2 pi or less than negative 2 pi, so you have to go around the circle more than once. So when I look at something like 81 pi over 2, and I think, where does that end up? You could sit and count. You could say 0, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, 5 pi over 2. You could keep just counting until you get to 81. What I like to do is I like to know that any even power of pi is over here. So 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, any odd power of pi is there. Multiple of pi, I should say. So pi, 3 pi, 5 pi. So when I see 81 pi over 2, I'm thinking of that as 80 pi over 2 plus 1 pi over 2. So I'm thinking of a number that's a multiple of 2, very close to 81, and so I think of that as 80 pi. 80 pi over 2 is 40 pi. So I'm really taking 40 pi plus pi over 2. And I know that every even, so this is 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi. So I don't even have to go around and count those. I just know 40 pi is an even multiple of pi. It's going to end up there. So I went around to 40 pi. I have to go pi over 2 more than that, so I end up right there, which is 0, 1. So that's kind of an easy way to do it versus trying to count by half pies around the circle. I just know something close to 80 or to 81 is 80 pi, which would end up there, and then I know that I have to go pi over 2 more. So then the question is, what's the secant? So after I write my ordered pair, I have to know the secant. Secant is the reciprocal of the cosine. So the cosine is 0. If I take 0, or 0 over 1, and take its reciprocal and flip it, I'm going to get 1 over 0. That's undefined. So my secant is undefined at that spot. All right, so let's try tangent of 22 pi over 3. So again, I would think of, okay, what multiple of 3 is close to that? Well, 21 pi over 3 is close to that, plus another pi over 3. 21 pi over 3 is 7 pi. So I have to go 7 pi and then add another pi over 3. So on my unit circle, if I go to 7 pi, remember odd powers over here, so like 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi. So 7 pi is going to end up over here. So if I was going around, I'd end up at 7 pi. I have to go another third of a pi. So my ordered pair that goes with that would be both x and y will be negative, negative 1/2, negative square root 3 over 2. All right, there's my ordered pairs. The question is, what's the tangent? Tangent is the y value over the x value. Remember we talked about that you really could write it like this. Take the y value over the x value, but you always know because you multiply by 2 over 2, those 2's will cancel out. So I have negative radical 3 over negative 1, which will give me positive radical 3. Okay, number 7. 7 has cosecant of negative, so now we have a negative angle. Negative 13 pi over 6. This one's a little bit smaller. I know negative 12 pi over 6 will end up right here because that's negative 2 pi. I just have to go another negative pi over 6. So my reference angle is pi over 6. It's in the 4th quadrant, so my x value will be positive, radical 3 over 2. My y value is negative. This asks for the cosecant, which is the reciprocal of the y. So if I take my y, negative 1/2, and flip it over, I get negative 2. Okay, so that one's a little bit smaller, a little bit easier, I think. Just remember it's a negative angle. All right, let's try the next one. Cotangent of 35 pi over 4. Here I might think of 36 pi over 4, figure out what that is, but then minus a pi over 4. So I want to go a pi over 4 less than what that is. This ends up being 9 pi. So I'm going to go to 9 pi, but then take away pi over 4. All right, so when I look at 9 pi is right here. It's an odd multiple of pi. But as I'm going around this, I didn't want to go all the way to 9 pi. I wanted to go pi over 4 less than that. So I end up in the 2nd quadrant. Now again, you could count. You could say this is 4 fourths, 8 fourths, 12 fourths, 16, 20 fourths, 24 fourths, 28 fourths, 32 fourths, and then no, you get to 36 fourths. So you could count by fourths. I just try to think of something that I don't have to do all that counting. So once I know that my reference angle is pi over 4, it's in the 2nd quadrant, I have negative radical 2 over 2, positive radical 2 over 2. It asks for the cotangent, which is the x value over the y value. Again, I know the 2's are going to drop out, so I'm going to have negative square root of 2 over the square root of 2. Anything over itself is 1, so I get negative 1. 9, 36, or 31 pi over 6, I would probably again think of 30 pi over 6, and then I would add pi over 6. So when I go to my unit circle, 30 pi over 6 is really 5 pi. 5 pi is an odd multiple of pi, so I'll end up over here. So if I'm going around the circle, I get to 5 pi, which is 30 pi over 6. I have to go another 1/6 of a pi, which puts me there. Both x and y will be negative, so negative square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. It wants the secant, which is the reciprocal of the cosine. So I would first write it as negative 2 over radical 3, rationalize my denominator. So I'm going to get negative 2 radical 3 over 3. Okay, and then the last one, tangent of negative 17 pi over 2. Don't forget it's negative. So again, I need to think, if I'm going in the negative direction, where do I end up at? Maybe at an axis. So maybe I want to go negative 16 pi over 2, and then I have to go still another negative pi over 2 to get me to negative 17. So I'm going in the negative direction. Negative 16 pi over 2 is negative 8 pi. So if I go around this way, I end up at negative 8 pi. I have to go another negative pi over 2, which puts me down here. And so I know that my ordered pair is 0, negative 1. It wants to know the tangent. Tangent is y over x. So if I take negative 1 over 0, it's undefined, so my tangent at negative 17 pi over 2 is undefined. So with all of these, just make sure that you can somehow find where that ends up, whether you have to count or whether you can kind of do a shortcut like this, okay?